Okay, so we're going to go ahead and move on to our next story. It's also a bit criminal, a little bit crimey. I thought it was another interesting one. This one, actually, we're going to look at a couple different events that happen in the country of jolly old England. We got the Carpenter copter back from Iran. I actually was able to track down the type of helicopter it was. I don't have it in front of me now, but it's a helicopter. No joke. It's a helicopter. It has wings. And the wings, rotate. Only the Carpenter copter could be that dope. Only the Carpenter copter is a helicopter with wings. I actually think they're decommissioned, so we got it on sale. That's why we're having it. So the Carpenter copter is all tricked out. We're going to hop in it. We're saying goodbye to Askir. So we're going to hop in the Carpenter copter, taking it over to jolly old England. Now, luckily we're in Florida because we're actually going to have to fly through the Bermuda Triangle. Oh no, the instruments are going off. Because we have to go back in time too. A couple times actually, but we're not going to double back to Bermuda Triangle each time. We go through a time warp in the Bermuda Triangle. And to save on fuel, it actually teleports us to England. Why not? So anyways, now we're in England in the year 1938. And we are in the town of Halifax. Or city, one of the two. We're in we'll say city of Halifax in England. For 1 week, the city was on the edge of terror. Or grip of terror, whatever the phrase is. They're in something of terror. There was a man known as the Halifax Slasher. Interesting story. He didn't start off slashing people. So anyways, on one day, 2 women run to the police and say, oh my God, I was just attacked by a man with a mallet and bright buckles on his shoes. So after ruling out all leprechauns in the area, the police are like, we're baffled. We don't know who this guy with this mallet is. The next time, the bright-buckled man used a knife or a razor blade, so they're like, oh, okay, now we'll call him the Halifax Slasher, as opposed to the Halifax Masher, if he had kept using a mallet, but now he's the Halifax Slasher, because he stabbed another woman, or slashed another woman in the buttocks. This goes on for a week, and people are like, oh my God, ouch, someone poked me in the butt. Go to the cops. Vigilante squads form up. You'll learn through this story that England's really big on their vigilantes. Vigilante squads form up, begin roaming the city looking for the Halifax Slasher. A couple of people got beat up because they were assumed to be the Halifax Slasher. There started to be reports in nearby cities. Oh no, I got slashed too. My butt. 8 victims in a week. In 1 week. And again, back then, 8 people was a lot of people because there was only 20,000 people world population. So 8 people slashed in 1 week in one town. Everyone was totally freaking out. A couple days later, a couple days after it all started, this dude walks into a police station and said, I never got attacked. I made it up. Never got attacked. Cops are like, what? They started investigating the other people, and the other people were like, yeah, I didn't get attacked either. I totally made it up. Totally made it up. Out of the 8 people who were attacked, 5 of them recanted and said, no, that never happened to me. 4 of them went to prison for misreporting a crime. They take stuff pretty seriously over there. And they're like, it was just mass hysteria. Now, the first 2 may have actually been legit with the mallet, but out of the 8, 5 people recanted their stories. Now, it was funny because when they were investigating the crime, they go, in Halifax, they said, well, back in 1927, there was a slasher in Halifax. So maybe it's the same guy. In 1927, James Leonard was convicted of stalking and slashing at women. Slashing at their clothes, mostly, with a slasher, with a razor blade. But he was sentenced to 6 months for it. So when the police were investigating the slashing allegations 11 years later, they go, maybe it's James Leonard. And then the thing is that they look at the description and they're like, okay, bright buckles. No, it doesn't have bright buckles. But James Leonard had a huge nose. His nose apparently was so big that the cops are like, can't be this new guy. Can't be this new guy because no one talks about how big his nose is. They're more concerned about how bright his buckles are on his shoes. How big does your nose have to be that if you're walking down the street with a razor blade, the first thing people are going to see is your nose? But you're thinking, okay, Jason, yeah, a guy walking around with a mallet, bright buckles on his shoes, may or may not have a big nose. Okay, so what? Now we're going to go back to the year of 1788. And this is the year of the London Monster. For 2 years, 50 women got their butts cut. It's super bizarre. So there is a fetish called Piquerism. Piquerism, one of the two. I'm going to call it Piquerism, because I imagine it's like peekaboo. But, so, Piquerism, or maybe it's Piquerism. Piquerism, we'll say Piquerism. Piquerism is a sexual, I'm reading this description from Wikipedia, so if I sound robotic, that's why. Piquerism is a sexual interest in penetrating the skin of another person with sharp objects, such as pins, razors, knives, etc. That's actually, you'll see it pop up in news reports even today, because it's a fetish. Go back to the description. Sometimes this is serious enough to cause extreme injuries or even death. Piquerism is a paraphilia as well as a form of sadism. The most frequently targeted areas of the body are the breasts, buttocks, and groin. Ow. Breasts and buttocks, I mean, it hurt, but how do you surprise someone in the groin? I guess not all of the people who are into Piquerism jump out of the bushes, but anyways, so in 1788, they had the London Monster. So for over 2 years, or around 2 years, 50 women fell prey to this guy. He was this big guy who would walk down the street and yell at them, yell obscenities at them. So like back then, he's probably like, "You cur!" And they'd be like, "Oh my God, did he say that in public?" And then he'd stab him in the butt. I find the details of this story hilarious. Like, the actual event, not so much. So anyways, one of the tricks, so they said that he would follow him down the street and yell obscenities at them, and then poke him in the butt. Another trick he would use, I didn't know these existed, but I guess it's a thing. This shows how juvenile I am. Another trick he used was he would walk up to them, and he would get them to smell his nosegay. So a nosegay is another term for a small bouquet of flowers. Now, I get why they're called nosegay, because you smell the flowers and it makes your nose happy. But I think that, yes, it is very juvenile for me to laugh at something called a nosegay, but I'm gonna do it anyways. I will have to say, though, that is an awesome name for a band. The Nosegays. Tell me you would not buy an album from a band called The Nosegays. And then people would either laugh at just the absurdity of the name, or they'd be like, actually, that is an old-timey English word for a small bouquet of flowers. It's been related to the London Monster. So he walked around, and he would walk up to women and say, "Smell my nosegay." And nobody was like, "What'd you say?" They'd be like, "Oh, that's a beautiful nosegay. Let me put your nosegay next to my nose, and let's see if it makes my nose gay." Ha ha. Men, this is another detail I thought was so funny. So the city's on the edge of the grip of terror. Last 2 years, men were like, "Well, I'm not the monster. I am no London Monster." Men in the city formed a club, and part of the things they would do is they would wear pins on their shirt of like a picture of a club. I don't know if it's like a Captain Caveman club or a club from a deck of cards. It just said a club. Now, if people were being accused of poking people in the butt, the last thing I would want to wear is a pin on my shirt. But anyway, so men in the town of London were like, "Well, I'm no monster. Look, I have a pin." And these guys, who said they weren't monsters, they were not the London Monster, they named their group No Monster Club. What? That is the worst name possible. That's like, okay, a bunch of kids came up with the name Monster Squad because they hunted monsters. You are saying you're not a monster, and instead of like the League Against the Monster or anything other than, so what's that pin mean? You're like, "Oh, I'm in the No Monster." These are adults naming this stuff. Anyways, people are saying, "Do I have a nosegay on me? Look, I'm in No Monster Club." And then armed patrols of vigilantes patrolling the streets of London. Women started wearing copper pans over their petticoats. So they were like being armored. They'd have like a pan hanging off their back so they couldn't get poked. It'd go like ding, and he'd be like foiled, and he'd run away. Eventually, this guy was arrested in 1790. Reineke Williams was arrested, and the people were so, like, the people of London were so pissed off at any of this happened. Trial got jammed packed full of spectators, and I use the term spectators because when the prosecutor would make a good point, the audience would cheer, be like, "Yeah, yeah," and then when the defense made a point, the audience began booing. They were literal spectators, like a sport. Eventually, the judge, like, this is not a fair trial. They had to try him again. He ended up getting sentenced to 6 years, and the charge that he got sentenced with was robbery And then the little specification, because you're like, robbery, he didn't steal anything. But robbery had a special qualification. It was assault with intent to spoil clothing. And that actually carried a bigger charge than attempted murder at the time. So if you were assaulting someone with your main motivation being to ruin their clothes, it was worse than attempted murder. So that's what he got charged with. He did 6 years. So you're thinking, oh, Jason, that was awesome. Nosegays and no monster club and people saying, I don't poke someone. Look at this pin on my shirt. Absurdity. How can you top that? Now we're going back 70 some odd years. We're still in England. We're going to a place called Hackney, England, where a man named Thomas Wallace puts both those previous guys to shame. So what happened was you had a period from October 10th to December 1st. So a longer reign of terror than Halifax Slasher, but not as impressive as London Monster. But in that time period, from October 10th to December 1st, he attacked 70 women. His weapon of choice was a giant stick, because see, now we're going farther back in time. They're like, well, we don't even have knives. It's 1712. We don't even have knives. We barely have clothes. All he had was a giant rod of birch, and he would jump out of the bushes or walk down the street and sneak up on these women and just beat them with this stick. And his name was Whipping Tom. That was basically, like, we have the Joker and Green Goblin. Back then, he was Whipping Tom. And it's funny, if you think about it, that's the evolution of the evil names as well. You go from Halifax Slasher, which you could hear today, to London Monster, which is a little old-timey, to just, that's just Whipping Tom. And the cops are like, we don't know what to do, we can't catch this guy or anything like that. They eventually, though, do capture him, and his plan, it was just absolutely bizarre. So it wasn't just, the Halifax Slasher was a myth. It most likely didn't happen, except for maybe 1 or 2 attacks in the beginning. The London Monster, it was this voyeuristic thing. So why was Whipping Tom jumping out of bushes or chasing women down the street with a big old stick? When they asked Wallace why he was doing it after they arrested him, he said, and I'm going to read this quote from the confession, and it's old-timey, so it's all weird. He was resolved to be revenged on all the women he could come at after that manner, for the sake of one perjured female who had been barbarously false to him. So basically, a woman lied to him. Either a woman besmirched his name, or perjured him in the old county square, or got his mom, or he told a lie and he got locked up in the stocks, or some other old-timey punishment. So old-timey punishment requires old-timey revenge, which is just a big old stick running down the road with a big old stick. His plan was this. He basically, this was his die hard with a vengeance plan. This was his master goal as a super criminal. He was going to attack 100 women before Christmas. So he was getting up there. He had attacked 70 women between October and December 1st. He was going to attack 100 women before Christmas. Take a break off for the 12 days of Christmas. He was going to take a break off for the 12 days of Christmas and then going to start the attacks again in the new year. So basically he wanted to whip 100 women with this big old stick. Then he wanted to get a partridge in a pear tree and be like, 12 maids a milking, 5 golden rings. And then not after the song was done, but after the literal 12 days of Christmas, he was going to be like, ooh, what was I doing? Oh yeah, assaulting women. He grabs his stick that I assume now is festive with red and green tassel wrapped around it. He's going out there with his big stick. That didn't happen. He ended up getting arrested. And the weirdest part of all of this, of the Whipping Tom story, if you could top any of that nonsense, he wasn't even the first Whipping Tom. About 100 years earlier in England, there was another guy who went by the name Whipping Tom who was jumping out of bushes whipping people with sticks. I mean, I'm sure there's weirdos like this all over the planet. Actually, I'm 100% for sure there's weirdos like that all over the planet, but it's just, I was looking up the Halifax Slasher because I was like, oh, mass hysteria. I like doing stories about how the mind works and how people can get panicked to make other people panic. But as I was researching it, it was like, oh, if you're interested in this, also look at the London Monster. I'm like, how can I pass that up? And clicked on that, and I'm like, oh my god, this is even funnier. And then it's like, well, if you love the London Monster, try this link, Whipping Tom. So I kind of got sucked into it, but that's why it's not like England has a high population of assaulting weirdos or any higher than the rest of the world. But I think they probably are just better at keeping old-timey records, so we can go back and look at the stuff and be like, look at wood carvings of like a chick running down the street and a guy chasing her with a stick. Well, that is good. You're like, Jason, did you just make fun of a guy beating women with a stick for 20 minutes? That wasn't the intent. It was the old-timey ridiculousness of it all that I was laughing at, not the fact that this guy is wailing on women. So that's it. That is it. We had a bunch of sexual perverts running around this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I don't know where that came from. That sounded totally wrong. That was a clip from our daily podcast, Dead Rabbit Radio. Dead Rabbit Radio is available anywhere that you listen to podcasts. It's daily paranormal, conspiracy, and true crime news. If you want to hear the full episode that this clip came from, check the link below. Please like and subscribe. And hit that little bell, too. That does some magical stuff. Thanks, guys.